Welcome to the deep dive, where we really plunge into the sources, the articles, the research, and pull out those key nuggets of knowledge just for you. Today, we're diving into something that sounds maybe a bit niche, but it's actually incredibly vital in modern medicine. We're talking about precision. Absolute precision in shoulder surgery. Just imagine for a second you're maybe facing total shoulder arthroplasty, TSA they call it. It's this major procedure, right? Designed to get rid of awful pain, give you back your movement. But the success of that surgery, it really hinges on an almost unbelievable level of accuracy. We're talking replacing parts of your shoulder joint, the socket, the glenoid, getting that angle spot on. And you might think, well, how much difference can a few degrees make? But, in the body, especially a joint like the shoulder, tiny angles, huge consequences. Yeah, think about this. Using some of the older methods, a surgeon might, without even knowing it, place an implant based on a measurement that's off by, well, the paper suggests over 14 degrees in some cases.
14 degrees, that's massive in this context.
Exactly. And that tiny sounding error, it could mean years of pain-free life versus, going back under the knife for another really tough, expensive revision surgery.
Which nobody wants.
Nobody. And this isn't just for surgeons, is it? It's really for anyone curious about how medicine moves forward, how brilliant people are pushing for that accuracy that genuinely changes lives.
Absolutely. And what's really remarkable here, I think, is how a seemingly small refinement, just tweaking how you measure something, can have these huge ripple effects. Our mission today is to unpack one of those innovations. A potentially groundbreaking way to measure that shoulder socket angle, the glenoid version. It's called the ellipse modification of the Friedman method.
Ellipse modification, okay.
And this isn't just theory, it's backed by solid research, a key paper published in the Bone and Joint Journal back in February 2020. And a really crucial contributor to this work, someone instrumental in actually writing the manuscript, so really shaping how the findings were presented, ensuring that scientific rigor, is Professor Mo Imam.
Professor Imam?
Yes, he's based at Ashford and St. Peter's Hospital's NHS Trust. And he's a highly prolific researcher, exceptionally cited. We're talking 146 publications, over 1,100 citations. His input here really speaks volumes about the thought behind this method.
That's some serious expertise.
It is. And the core idea, the whole point, is that getting that precision before surgery in the planning stage is just vital for success. It directly impacts how well you function afterwards, your quality of life.
So what does this all mean for you listening in? Maybe you're not a surgeon, maybe you're not having shoulder surgery, but understanding this relentless drive for getting things exactly right, it gives you real insight into how medicine improves, doesn't it?
It really does.
We're going to get into why these tiny angles matter so much and how research like this, spearheaded by people like Professor Imam, makes a real difference. It's science refining how we heal. Okay, so let's set the stage properly. Let's talk about the stakes in total shoulder arthroplasty, because they are incredibly high. TSA, it's a big deal. You're replacing damaged parts, the ball of your upper arm bone, the humerus, and that shallow cup, the glenoid, your shoulder socket, replacing them with artificial parts.
Prosthetic components, yeah.
Think of it like, building a house inside your shoulder, high-stakes construction. And just like with the house, the foundation, it has to be perfectly level. If it's off even a bit,
everything else is compromised. Walls, roof.
Exactly. In TSA, that foundation is the glenoid component, this artificial socket they put in. And the main goal, the absolute driver for the surgeon, is getting that alignment just right. Anatomically correct.
That's the key to making the implant last, making sure your shoulder works properly, hopefully for decades.
Yeah.
Pain-free movement, that's the dream.
The dream.
And connecting this to the bigger picture. The reason that foundation, that alignment, is so incredibly critical is because glenoid loosening. Well, it's the most common reason why these anatomical shoulder replacements fail.
Loosening. So the implant comes away from the bone.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
And that's the #1 reason patients end up needing revision surgery, a second operation, which is complex, costly, painful, just something everyone wants to avoid.
Definitely.
And this is where glenoid version comes right into the spotlight. It's basically the angle of that socket. Is it tilted too far forward? That's anti-version.
Yeah.
Or too far backward? That's retroversion.
Okay, the tilt.
Yeah, the tilt. If that angle isn't right, even by just a few degrees, it puts abnormal stress on the new implant. Constant, uneven pressure. And over time, that stress can cause the component to slowly work its way loose.
Okay. So that slight tilt leads directly to the loosening problem.
It's a major contributing factor, absolutely.
And these aren't just, theoretical worries from research papers, are they? This stuff is real. It hits patients hard.
Devastatingly real.
Yeah.
and meticulously documented.
There are studies, right? Like Farron and his team back in 2006. They found if the glenoid was put in more than 5 degrees too far back, too retroverted,
Yeah, more than 5 degrees retroversion.
it led to a 7-fold increase in micromotion. 7 times. Micromotion. That sounds small, but it's
Yeah.
bad, right?
It's terrible. Imagine tiny little destructive wobbles where the implant meets the bone. It destabilizes everything. And they also found a 3.26-fold increase in stress right at that bone cement interface. It's basically asking for the implant to fail early.
Wow. Okay. And then there was Shapiro, 2007. They showed that if you don't correct that backward tilt, that retroversion, you get eccentric loading.
It's eccentric loading, yeah. Think of it like the force isn't spread evenly across the implant. It's constantly pushing it off center.
Like leaning on one side of a chair leg constantly.
Kind of, yeah. And that leads directly to more wear on the implant material itself, and again, it loosens faster.
And even small amounts matter. I think Neiffeler's group showed that.
Yes. Neiffeler et al. In 2006, they used cadaver models, very precise, showed that even tiny steps of retroversion, just 4 degrees at a time, caused the humeral head, the ball part, to shift backward, off-center. And that led to early loosening in their models.
So even small errors add up.
They absolutely do. And maybe most importantly, for how a patient actually feels and functions, Yayin and colleagues in 2005 found a direct link. More retroversion in the implant, significantly lower constant scores.
The constant score, that measures shoulder function, right? Pain, movement.
Exactly. It's a standard measure. Lower scores mean more pain, less movement, basically a shoulder that doesn't work well for everyday things. Reaching up, getting dressed.
So we're not just talking about implant survival here. We're talking about real day-to-day pain and limitation for the patient and potentially needing another operation.
Precisely. And while, sure, other things play a role, patient factors like age, sex, the implant design itself, getting that glenoid position right, that's a huge factor. And crucially, it's something the surgeon can control.
It's controllable. That's the key.
It is. It's a critical moment in the OR where accurate measurement can literally change the patient's future.
Okay, so the stakes are sky high. Getting that angle right is non-negotiable. Which brings us to the obvious question. How do surgeons measure it accurately? You mentioned CT scans. Regular x-rays aren't enough.
No, conventional x-rays just don't give you the detail you need for version. You absolutely need a CT scan, computed tomography. It gives you those cross-sectional slices.
Right. But even with CT scans, you said there's no single best way everyone agrees on.
That's the surprising thing. There isn't universal consensus. Different techniques exist. But one thing everyone does agree on is that the CT scans must be properly reformatted.
Reformatted? What does that mean?
It means digitally realigning the images so you're looking squarely at the shoulder blade, the scapula, in its natural plane. You remove any tilt or rotation from how the scan was taken. It's called the scapula plane reformat.
Okay, so you have to get the image lined up perfectly first.
Absolutely. If you don't do that basic step right, any measurement you take afterwards is basically garbage. It won't be accurate or reproducible.
Got it. Foundational step. So assuming you've got your properly reformatted CT, what's been the main method people use?
Historically, and still very common because it's relatively straightforward, the go-to has been the Friedman method, described way back in 1992 by Friedman and his colleagues.
Friedman method. Okay. How does that work?
It uses a bony landmark called the coracoid process. It's this hook-like bone sticking off the front of your shoulder blade. You find that, and then you measure the glenoid version on an axial slice, a cross-section that's 10 millimeters below it.
10 millimeters below the coracoid? Seems specific.
It is specific.
Yeah.
But, and here's the crucial but, if it's so widely used, what's the problem? Why bother developing something new like Professor Imam and his co-authors did?
Yeah, good question. What's the catch?
The catch is the coracoid itself.
Ah, the reference point.
Exactly. And this is where the paper we're looking at gets really interesting and where the ellipse method comes in. The paper points out quite directly that the coracoid process is highly variable.
Variable how? Like shape, position.
Both. Its shape can differ quite a bit between people, and critically, its exact position relative to the actual glenoid socket isn't consistent.
So if your landmark moves around,
Your measurement starting point moves around. It makes it really hard to consistently find what everyone agrees is the true mid-glenoid level.
mid-glenoid level. Why is hitting that exact middle point so important?
Because the glenoid version, that angle we care so much about, it actually changes along the face of the socket. It's not the same angle top to bottom.
Really? It varies.
Oh yeah. Typically, the upper part of the glenoid is more retroverted, tilted back, more than the middle part, the true equator.
Ah, okay. So if you measure too high or too low because your coracoid landmark puts you in the wrong spot.
You get a skewed measurement. You might think the version is, say, 10 degrees retroverted, but the true version at the middle might only be 5 degrees, or vice versa. You're measuring the wrong slice, essentially.
And that inconsistency, that reliance on a variable landmark, that's the Achilles heel of the Friedman method.
That's exactly what the authors argue. It introduces this inherent variability that surgeons have just had to kind of deal with. Now, there are other methods, sure, Randelli's method, Poonen-Ting's vault method for tricky cases.
But Friedman's has been the most popular.
Generally, yes, because it seems relatively easy to apply, which makes this variability problem even more significant. It highlights why a more reliable way to find that mid-glenoid level was really needed. And what's really cool about the ellipse method is where it came from. It wasn't just dreamt up in a lab somewhere. It came directly out of the clinical trenches, you could say. The authors, including Professor Mo Imam, who, remember, was key in actually writing this paper articulating the findings they were facing, these exact limitations of the Friedman method, day in, day out in their own surgical practice.
They were living the problem.
Exactly. And especially with newer digital imaging, where you can see the axial and sagittal views, cross-section and side view side by side simultaneously.
Ah, that must make the inconsistencies more obvious.
It really does. You start seeing how relying on just the coracoid isn't always hitting the same spot relative to the glenoid itself. So their goal became really clear. Find a way to consistently, reliably nail down that mid-glenoid level every single time.
Not just guess or hope you're in the right place.
Precisely. It wasn't about totally changing how you measure the angle between the lines, but about making sure where you draw those lines is standardized and accurate, taking the guesswork out.
Okay, so let's unpack it. How does this ellipse method actually work? Walk us through the steps. It sounds like a visual journey.
It is, and it's actually quite elegant once you break it down. It's basically 5 steps using those modern CT views. Step 1, you start with the sagittal view, the side view of the shoulder. And on that view, you draw what they call a best fit ellipse right around the entire glenoid fossa, top to bottom.
Like putting an oval picture frame around the socket from the side.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
You capture the whole vertical extent. That ellipse becomes your geometric guide.
All right, step 2.
Step 2, measure the vertical diameter of that ellipse you just drew. The total height. Simple measurement.
Got it. Full height. Step 3.
Step 3, calculate the exact midpoint of that vertical diameter. Just divide the height by 2. That gives you the precise vertical center of the glenoid in that side view.
The geometric middle, not based on a wobbly bone landmark.
Exactly. That's the key innovation. Uses geometry, not variable anatomy, to find the center.
Clever. Okay, step 4.
Step 4. Now you use the power of the linked views. You find the axial slice, the cross-sectional view, that corresponds exactly to that calculated midpoint you found on the sagittal view. You scroll through the axial slices until you hit the one that lines up perfectly with your midpoint marker.
Ah, so the sagittal view guides you to the correct axial slice.
Precisely. That specific slice is your defined, consistent, reproducible mid-glenoid level. Found it.
No more ambiguity. And step 5.
Step 5. Now that you're confidently on the right axial slice, you measure the glenoid version, and you use the exact same landmarks as the original Friedman method. You draw the glenoid line across the socket face. You draw the scapular axis line.
And measure the angle between them.
Correct. So the angle measurement itself is familiar, but the plane you're measuring it on is now defined with much, much greater consistency thanks to that ellipse.
Okay, let me make sure I've got this. It's not a totally new angle measurement, but a much, much better way of making sure you're measuring that angle at the right spot, the true middle of the glenoid every single time.
You got it. It refines Friedman by fixing its biggest weakness. Finding the correct level reliably, it gives it a stable geometric foundation.
That makes a lot of sense.
And this leads to a really important question. What does this mean practically for the surgeon in the operating room?
Yeah, beyond just a better number on a planning sheet.
Well, finding that true mid-glenoid level accurately, it doesn't just help plan. It gives the surgeon a much clearer picture of the ideal entry point for the central guide wire when they're actually putting the glenoid component in.
The first pin they place to guide the implant.
Exactly. The paper calls it intraoperative corroboration. It means the surgeon has a better map during the surgery itself. They could be more confident they're aiming for the right spot, the center they identified in planning.
So it connects the plan to the action much more reliably.
That's the idea. Potentially fewer errors in placement, better positioning of the actual implant, it builds that bridge between planning and doing.
Okay, so the method sounds elegant, logical, very clever, actually. But how do they prove it works? How do they test it rigorously?
Right, the study design, this was a retrospective study, meaning they went back and looked at data that already existed.
Patient scans already done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They pulled up 100 CT scans from 100 different patients who were all getting their first primary shoulder replacement. So a good-sized group.
An irrelevant group, the actual patients who need this.
Definitely. It was a mix, 58 women, 42 men, average age around 65, 66, but ranging all the way from 19 to 93. So it captured that typical TSA demographic pretty well.
And the scans themselves, they made sure they were suitable?
Oh, absolutely crucial. They used a standard protocol, thin 1 millimeter slices through the glenoid. And importantly, they ensured all scans were properly reformatted into that scapula plane we talked about.
You can get the alignment right from the start.
Essential. They also had clear rules for who was in and who was out inclusion-exclusion criteria. Had to be adults, first-time TSA, needed a good quality CT scan available digitally.
And who did they exclude?
People who'd already had shoulder replacements or surgery on their scapula, anyone whose bones weren't fully mature, or if the CT scan was just technically inadequate, not properly reformatted, didn't show the whole shoulder blade, that sort of thing.
So they were careful to compare like with like, making sure the data was clean.
Very careful. That's vital for results you can trust.
Okay, so they had the scans. Who did the measuring and how?
2 senior observers did the measurements. The paper calls them SJ and SH. Experienced clinicians who know how to read these scans. And they both measured glenoid version using the classic Friedman method and the new Ellipse method on all 100 scans. So a direct comparison on the same patients.
Both methods, both observers. Okay.
But they added another layer of rigor, observer 1, SJ. They measured Friedman once, but they measured using the Ellipse method twice.
Twice. Why?
With a 1-month gap between the two measurements. This was to test intra-rater reliability. How consistent is the same person using the Ellipse method over time? Do they get the same result if they measure again later?
Ah, checking for drift or inconsistency in one person's measurements. Smart.
Very smart. And observer 2, SH, measured the Ellipse method once. So this whole setup allowed them to look at everything.
Like what?
Well, comparing Ellipse versus Friedman directly. Comparing observer 1 versus observer 2 using the Ellipse method, that's intra-rater reliability, consistency between different people. And comparing observer 1's first Ellipse measurement to their second Heller, that's the intra-rater reliability we just talked about.
Wow, okay. That's thorough. Covering all the bases for reliability.
Extremely thorough. It's how you really build confidence in a new measurement technique.
So they had all these measurements. How did they analyze the numbers? What stats did they use?
They used a solid statistical toolkit to really dig into what the numbers meant. First, a paired t-test. This basically checks if the average difference between two sets of measurements like Ellipse versus Friedman or observer 1 versus observer 2 is statistically significant. Is the difference likely real or just random chance?
Okay, average difference.
Then, critically, they use Bland-Altman plots. These are brilliant for looking at agreement between methods. Instead of just averages, it plots the difference between two measurements for each patient against the average of those two measurements.
So you see the spread, how much individual measurements might disagree.
Exactly. It visually shows you the range of disagreement. Are the methods generally close across the board, or do they sometimes differ wildly? You look for the limits of agreement on the plot. Narrow limits mean good agreement. Wide limits, not so much.
Okay, Bland-Altman for agreement. What else?
The interclass correlation coefficient, or ICC, this gives you a single number, between 0 and 1, that quantifies reliability or consistency. Higher is better. In this study, they defined 0.90 or above as excellent.
ICC for reliability. Got it.
And finally, the repeatability coefficient. This gives you a practical number. It tells you how much difference you'd expect to see between two measurements made by the same person using the same method 95% of the time. A smaller number means better repeatability, higher precision.
So t-test for significance, Bland-Altman for agreement spread, ICC for overall reliability, and repeatability for single-user precision. That's comprehensive.
It really is. And one more crucial thing. They defined beforehand what they considered clinically significant.
Not just statistically significant, but actually mattering in practice.
Exactly. For this study, they set that threshold at a difference greater than plus or minus 5 degrees between methods.
5 degrees, why 5?
That's generally considered a threshold in orthopedics, where the difference is large enough that it might actually change the surgeon's plan, affect implant choice, positioning strategy, and potentially impact the patient's outcome.
Okay, so they had a clear line in the sand for what really matters clinically.
Yes. It allows them to interpret the statistical results in a really practical, meaningful way for surgeons and patients.
All right, the moment of truth. They did all this careful work. What did the numbers actually show? Let's start with the average differences. Friedman versus Ellipse.
Okay, so the average glenoid version measured by the traditional Friedman method was maggots of 3.11 degrees. That negative means retroversion tilted slightly back.
Okay, average Friedman minus 3.11.
The average measured by the ellipse method, using observer 1's data, was minus the 1.95 degrees retroversion.
Minus 1.95, so slightly less retroverted on average with the ellipse method.
On average, yes. The mean difference between ellipse and Friedman was 1.16 degrees, and statistically, this difference was significant. The p-value was 0.002.
Okay, 1.16 degrees difference on average, and statistically significant. But
Yeah.
you hinted earlier that the average isn't the full story, right?
Not even close. This is exactly where it gets really interesting and why those Bland-Altman plots are so vital. That 1.16 degree average difference. Honestly, it might sound pretty small, maybe not clinically huge on its own.
Yeah, you might think, okay, about a degree, maybe not a disaster.
Right. But that average hides the spread. It tells you nothing about how much the methods might disagree for an individual patient.
And that's where the Bland-Altman plot comes in, comparing Ellipse versus Friedman.
Exactly. And the results there were, well, quite startling, actually. The 95% limits of agreement were huge. They ranged from minus 6.15 degrees all the way up to plus 8.46 degrees.
Oh, minus 6 to plus 8.5, what does that mean practically?
It means, okay, let's say the ellipse method measures a patient's glenoid at exactly 0 degrees version. The Bland-Altman plot tells us that for that same patient, the Friedman method could, 95% of the time, report value anywhere between negative 6.15 degrees and plus 8.46 degrees.
That's a potential range of almost 15 degrees for the same shoulder, depending only on which method you used.
Precisely. That represents, in the author's words, and by any clinical standard, poor agreement. The two methods might be close on average, but for any given patient, they could give you wildly different numbers.
And that could lead to totally different surgical decisions for the same person.
Absolutely. And remember that 5-degree threshold for clinical significance.
Yeah.
The study found that in 16% of the patients, 16 out of 100, the difference between the ellipse measurement and the Friedman measurement was more than 5 degrees.
16%. Nearly 1 in 5 patients had a clinically significant difference depending on the method used.
Yes. For almost a fifth of these patients, the choice of measurement method could have directly led to a different surgical plan, potentially impacting their outcome. It really drives home how much finding a consistent method matters.
Wow. Okay, so poor agreement between the methods, but how did the ellipse method perform on its own? You mentioned they tested its internal consistency.
Now that's where the story flips. In stark contrast to the poor agreement with Friedman, the ellipse method showed excellent reliability and reproducibility, both between observers and within the same observer.
Okay, let's break that down. First, between the two observers, inter-rater reliability.
Right. Comparing observer 1 and observer 2 using the ellipse method, the mean difference between them was tiny. It's just 0.063 degrees, not statistically significant at all. Basically, they got the same average result.
Good start.
Yeah.
And the Bland-Altman limits for ellipse between observers, were they wide like before?
Remarkably narrow. The 95% limits of agreement were only 1 to 1.98 to plus 2.0 degrees.
Minus 2 to plus 2. So 95% of the time, two different surgeons using the ellipse method would get a result within about 2 degrees of each other for the same patient.
Exactly. That's excellent agreement. Much, much better than the nearly 15-degree range we saw when comparing with Friedman.
Okay, and the ICC value for that?
The intraclass correlation coefficient for inter-rater agreement was 0.993.
0.993. That's way above the 0.90 threshold for excellent.
Absolutely. It indicates excellent reproducibility between different users.
Fantastic. Okay, now what about inter-rater? The same observer measuring twice, a month apart.
Even better, actually. Observer 1 measuring the same scans twice with the ellipse method. The mean difference was minuscule. 9 is 0.841 degrees. Again, not statistically significant.
Almost zero difference on average.
Pretty much. And the 95% limits of agreement, even tighter, from minus 0.98 degrees to plus 0.90 degrees.
Less than 1 degree variation 95% of the time if the same person measures again.
Incredible, isn't it? That's superb precision. And the repeatability coefficient confirmed this. It was 0.94 degrees, meaning 95% of repeated measurements by the same person will differ by less than 1 degree.
Wow. And the ICC for intra-rater?
Almost perfect, 0.999.
Okay, so to summarize, ellipse versus Friedman, poor agreement, potentially large clinically significant differences, but ellipse versus ellipse, whether between users or by the same user over time. Excellent agreement, highly reproducible, very precise.
That's the core finding in a nutshell. The ellipse method demonstrated a level of reliability that the traditional Friedman method simply couldn't match in this study.
So this really raises the question, doesn't it? What could this level of proven precision mean for actual shoulder surgery moving forward?
It suggests we now have a tool, a method, that can provide a much more trustworthy and consistent number for that critical glenoid version angle.
Yeah.
You could standardize planning, reduce variability between surgeons, and give everyone more confidence in that initial assessment. And that confidence should, hopefully, translate into better surgical execution and ultimately better patient outcomes.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit. Let's talk broader context and really hammer home the so what of all this. The main message from the paper, then, isn't just, here's a new method. It's that the real breakthrough is having a reliable way to find that mid-glenoid level, right?
That's what the authors, including Professor Imam in his writing, really emphasize. They call consistently defining that mid-glenoid level the most important step for getting accurate 2D CT measurements of version.
And it's so important because other ways of trying to find it, like just counting slices down from the top or something, they just weren't reliable enough.
Exactly. The paper cites another study, Vandebunt et al., from 2015, that tried a slice counting method. Their ICC for reliability, only 0.70.
0.70 versus the ellipse method's 0.993 between observers. That's a night and day difference in reliability.
It really is. It shows the ellipse method isn't just a small tweak. It's a significant leap in consistency. It takes the ambiguity out of where you measure, ensuring everyone's looking at the same anatomically relevant spot.
Right. Getting everyone on the same page, measurement-wise.
And this touches on something else. The paper highlights the importance of using the right statistical tools and using them together.
The Bland-Altman plots and the ICCs.
Yes. Professor Imam and his co-authors stressed this point in the manuscript. The Bland-Altman shows you the size of the differences, the practical agreement. The ICC gives you that overall reliability number. Using both gives you a much better picture of the true reliability.
So you see not just if they're correlated, but how well they actually agree within limits that matter clinically.
Precisely. It's about robust science, not just finding a difference, but understanding its magnitude and consistency. That kind of methodological rigor is just as important as the clinical idea itself.
Absolutely. And you mentioned this study's reliability for the ellipse method was better than what other studies found when comparing Friedman to other methods like Randelli's or the Vault method.
That's right. Comparing the ICCs reported here for the ellipse method, those high 0.99 values, with ICCs reported in studies by Rouleau et al., comparing Friedman and Randelli, or Matsumura et al., comparing Friedman and Vault, the ellipse method demonstrated superior consistency in this particular investigation. It really seems to set a new benchmark for 2D measurement reliability.
Okay. But what about 3D? We hear a lot about 3D planning in surgery now. Does this 2D ellipse method still matter in the age of 3D?
That's a really important question.
Yeah.
And the paper acknowledges 3D reconstruction. For really complex cases, severe deformities, 3D planning is often seen as the benchmark. It gives you that full volumetric picture.
Yeah.
But it has limitations for routine, everyday use right now. It's generally expensive, needs special software, powerful computers. It requires significant training and expertise to use properly.
Okay. Cost and training hurdles.
And even with 3D, there's still user variability. The surgeon still has to define reference points and axes on the 3D model, which can introduce inconsistencies.
Ah, so 3D isn't automatically perfect either.
Not necessarily. And maybe the biggest point is the direct link between using 3D planning and actually achieving better long-term clinical outcomes for patients, like lower revision rates, better function scores. Years later, that link still needs more robust, independent proof across the board.
So the jury's still out on whether 3D consistently leads to better results yet.
The evidence is still building. And until we have that definitive proof, and maybe until 3D becomes more accessible and standardized, having a really accurate, reliable 2D measurement, a precise numerical angle, remains incredibly important.
Why? Why keep focusing on the 2D number?
For clear communication between surgeons, for comparing results in research studies effectively, for tracking outcomes over time, you need that consistent, quantifiable angle. And that's exactly what the highly reliable ellipse method provides. It fills a crucial need, even as 3D evolves.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's boil it down. What's the absolute core take-home message from Professor Imam and the other authors of this paper?
They really drive home three key points. One, getting that preoperative glenoid version measurement right is absolutely crucial for planning and executing a successful TSA. It's foundational.
Non-negotiable first step.
Two, if you have a good quality CT scan that includes the whole scapula and is properly reformatted in the scapular plane, the ellipse method is a highly reproducible and reliable way to find the true mid-glenoid level. That's its unique strength.
Reliable identification of the mid-glenoid.
And three, measuring version at that specific mid-glenoid level refines the old Friedman method. It gives you an accurate 2D angle measurement, plus it crucially shows the surgeon the ideal spot for that central guide wire during surgery.
Yeah.
It offers that valuable intraoperative corroboration.
So better planning and more confidence during the actual operation.
That's the promise, precision translating into practice. Now, good science always acknowledges its limits, and this study is no exception. The authors are upfront about the limitations.
Okay, what are the main ones we should keep in mind?
Well, first and foremost, this all hinges on having that CT scan correctly oriented and reformatted in the scapular plane to begin with.
Right, the foundational step we talked about.
Exactly. If that basic requirement isn't met, if the initial imaging isn't done right, then even the ellipse method will give you an erroneous measurement. It's not magic. It relies on good data in.
So the quality of the initial scan is paramount. That could be a practical hurdle for widespread use if imaging protocols aren't standardized everywhere.
It certainly could be. It highlights the need for consistent, high-quality imaging standards if we want to leverage methods like this effectively across different hospitals and clinics.
Okay, what else?
The study was retrospective. They looked back at past data.
Right, so they couldn't directly compare patient outcomes.
Correct. Because they were looking at scans that had already been done, they couldn't say, okay, Group A was planned with Ellipse, Group B with Friedman, and Group A had fewer revisions 5 years later. They could only assess the reliability of the measurements themselves.
But they do argue that better planning generally leads to better outcomes, right?
Yes, there's a strong consensus in orthopedics that accurate planning improves results. But to directly prove that the ellipse method causes better long-term outcomes would require a future prospective study.
Following patients forward in time.
Exactly. Comparing groups planned with different methods and tracking their function, pain scores, implant survival rates over several years, that's the next logical step in research.
Got it. Any other limitations or maybe strengths to balance those?
A key strength was that they used consecutive CT scans. They didn't cherry-pick easy or hard cases. They took the scans as they came, representing the real mix of patients a surgeon sees. That makes the findings on measurement reliability much more generalizable.
So it reflects real-world practice better.
Yes. And they also noted that the ellipse method seemed usable even when the glenoid was significantly deformed, which adds to its potential versatility.
Okay, so thinking about all this, what does it mean for you, the listener, looking ahead? We've seen how this, well, quite elegant refinement in measurement, driven by clinical need and rigorous research involving experts like Professor Imam, can boost precision. Where does that lead?
Well, you start to think about the knock-on effects, don't you?
Like how it might change training. Could this become the standard way orthopedic residents are taught to assess glenoid version, making this level of precision just standard practice from day one?
It certainly could influence curriculum development, yeah. Standardizing the approach.
And what about technology? Could this method be built into surgical planning software, maybe even automated with AI to measure versions super consistently, taking human variability out even further?
That's a definite possibility. Integrating validated, reliable methods into software is a clear pathway for innovation, reducing potential for error.
And the big picture. If this leads to more accurate surgery, fewer implants failing early, what about the savings for healthcare systems, fewer expensive revision surgeries?
That's a potential long-term benefit, absolutely. Better outcomes often mean lower overall costs down the line.
So it leaves you wondering, doesn't it? What's the next piece of research you'd want to see? Is it that direct link to patient outcomes? Studies quantifying fewer revisions, faster recovery, better long-term comfort, specifically because the ellipse method was used.
Those outcome studies are definitely key. Connecting the improved measurement directly to improve patient lives is the ultimate goal.
It really shows how this constant push for precision, even in something as specific as measuring an angle, is what drives medicine forward, aiming for that perfect outcome one step at a time.
Well, that was a truly deep dive, wasn't it? Into orthopedic precision, medical innovation. How research, like the paper co-authored and articulated by Professor Mo Imam, can take existing method and just refine it, make it so much more reliable, potentially leading to really significant improvements for patients. Yeah, we went from understanding why glenoid loosening is such a critical issue in shoulder replacements
Mm.
through the problems with older measurement methods, right, to this elegant ellipse solution and what it could mean for accuracy.
It's a fantastic example of how focusing on precision, even on what seems like a small detail, can have these huge downstream effects in medicine.
Absolutely. That relentless pursuit of getting it right, of building a better foundation through accurate measurement, that's how patient care truly advances, one reliable step at a time.
We hope you found that insightful. Join us next time for another deep dive where we'll unpack more sources and extract those crucial insights for you. Until then, stay curious, stay informed.